Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars Rebels episode review, my last Star Wars Rebels episode review. Today I'm going to be reviewing the finale, the last 3 episodes of the show, which are A Fool's Hope, which was like the setup episode, and then the finale, which was Family Reunion and Farewell as like a double length episode. Overall, I'm kind of conflicted about how I feel overall about the finale. I think all 3 episodes were good episodes of Rebels. Were they a good finale ending to Rebels as a show? To a degree, yes, but I sort of maybe expected a little more in a way, in that they definitely did things in a different way than I expected. And I do think that, like, if not for what they did right at the end in like the last 2-3 minutes, I think that sort of really saved things by actually going past episode 6 and kind of acknowledging that, like, okay, all these characters have actually survived up until this time, and here's what we're going to do next. We're actually going to search for Ezra. Here's Ahsoka, who's survived until this time. Hera has a son whose father is actually Kanan somehow, and Zeb and Callus are off doing this. That I thought was a very cool way to end it. As for, I suppose, the plot of just the kind of big conclusion to Rebels, which was, I suppose, the liberation of Lothal, it was weird because I expected them to do the thing where, like, this would be the big victory for the Rebels, and it would represent this idea that they can finally beat the invincible, unbeatable Empire. And they referenced that. I was very surprised to almost see them, like, start complaining about the rest of the Rebel Alliance come the end of the episode, of like, we don't actually need them, like, who cares about them, we did this on our own and we can show that we can do this. In that I felt like the entire show its fundamental plot was about this group of rebels showing that the overall Rebel Alliance can actually accomplish something. So having this be so focused on just our characters was, I think, good, because the show was, I think, fundamentally about them at a certain point, but it also, I think, sort of ended up forgetting about the fact that that's what so much of the plot in each episode of Rebels has been about. It's been about, oh, we need these ships, we need to stop this plan from happening, we need to reunite with this faction of the Rebels, we need to train people with this, we need to get these people on our side, building up the fact that, like, we need more people in the rebellion. So to have it kind of really in the end come down to just basically the Ghost crew plus, like, some of the most recurring characters like Vizago, Hondo, Ketsu and stuff like that, was cool in that it felt like all the kind of heroes coming together. But it also felt like I felt like they should have used the overall Rebel Alliance at some point, but or at least, like, after they get the victory, acknowledge them in some way. And that's where I think, in a way, Sabine kind of skipping past all of that, like, the Emperor fell, the Battle of Endor happened, and the Rebels won, and you're just kind of like, okay, but, like, what about, did this actually lead to the Rebel Alliance becoming the threat that it became, or what? Where was the kind of tie-in to, like, set up Rogue One and that victory? Where was the tie-in to set up, like, Luke and that sort of stuff? I think that's where it kind of struggled, in that the show was called Star Wars Rebels, and in a way this kind of felt more like this was the finale for, like, Star Wars Crew of the Ghost. And it's weird because I have criticized the show for being a little bit too focused on kind of the inner working day-to-day of trying to get the Rebel Alliance going. But I also feel like it is worth criticizing the finale a little bit for almost doing the opposite of that and having it be I think a little bit too much like the very early episodes of like, oh, it's just the Ghost Crew that basically is going to do this on their own to free Lothal, and it's going to act as this kind of example to everyone else. Um, I have other issues with the finale. I suppose the main one would be how they dealt with Thrawn. I really felt like overall the Rebels as a show never really did the character justice. I loved the character design, I loved the voice acting, and some of the presentation. It's just it always felt like he never lived up to the hype. And the hype I know is there because I read the Thrawn book, the new one, not the old EU stuff now. That book sold me completely on the character. And what they did with him here was, in a way, I think, treat him in a similar way to Governor Pryce. And again, the book does a good job at like, explaining Pryce and kind of what she's about better as well. But you always know that like Thrawn is like a different type of character to Pryce. So it felt so weird where you gave Pryce the kind of standing strong, loyal to the Empire, going down with the ship moment, and then Thrawn is taken out for now. I don't know if he's killed by being wrapped up by the space whales and then sent off into hyperspace. I assume they won't kill him off, but as the ending of him in Rebels, I didn't feel particularly strongly about what they did. Mainly because, like, while he was somewhat threatening in these episodes with just immediately kind of breaking it down to, like, okay, you have control of my base, you have my men, but I have my ship here and I'm just going to fire on your people. What are you going to do then? And just immediately that stopping things. I like that, but it was more Thrawn being cruel than being calculating as such. I suppose him realizing that would get him out of it is somewhat calculating, but again, you expect him to be find a way through his intellect and strategy to get around having to be cruel. Is kind of usually the way you, I think, expect Thrawn to operate, rather than, oh, I'll use cruelty in my plan to get what I want. There is still the upcoming Thrawn book that I assume is it has to be obviously set before most of his Rebels of involvement. So I'm interested to see where they go there. And then because he's out in like hyperspace and like we don't really know how far they went, and the fact that it seems like in the next like 5 to 10 years or something like that, Sabine wasn't able to find exactly where Ezra is, and it's now taking Ahsoka and Sabine going off on a mission directly to find Ezra. It obviously speaks to, Thrawn could be out in this place as well, and if it is like relating to wild space or whatever, the unknown regions, that immediately sort of brings like the Chiss into play, and that like Thrawn is technically kind of like from wild space because he's a Chiss, and it's a way to, like, if they go for it, I could see them linking the books into maybe Thrawn now being out in wild space, in that in the novel his kind of main kind of first commander officer, Eli, he sent him out on a mission basically to wild space to kind of negotiate with the rest of the Chiss. Now the book might do something to resolve that, but if that book doesn't resolve that plot point, then it kind of leaves it open for maybe him to reunite with Eli and the Chiss, and Thrawn remains a threat going forward. Because I would be shocked if this is just meant to be the death of Thrawn. This felt like a really kind of not respecting the character at all. In that it felt like when they introduced him, it was with a lot of respect, but the ending of the character didn't feel like there was all that much respect. So hopefully they kind of remedy that when we go forward. As I suppose characters who did die, obviously we saw the death of Pryce. We were teased with the death of Hondo's kind of pig friend guy, whose name I kind of forget. He was actually quite fun, I think, in the early episodes of just seeing him go crazy. Them sent him in as like the first guy fighting, and he gets hit but then wakes up later on. Gregor was, I suppose, the main character that they, I suppose, killed off, who was like a noted, I suppose, named character. nothing I suppose particularly like fancy or like impressive about like the way he went out. It led to a nice moment with Rex and Gregor. I suppose it's just bonding in that last moment. They tease quite heavily that like people were having to risk their lives to do all this. We saw the death of Rook, I suppose, and Zeb nearly getting himself killed. But other than that, they didn't do all that much. They as I said, they teased a lot of characters dying, and that's one thing I will sort of praise the earlier, the first two, I suppose, episodes for. When there were fights, there was definitely a sense of like characters are almost getting into like this is my last stand kind of fighting type situations of like Zeb ripping the turret off its mount and just like using it as a Gatling gun. That kind of felt like a last stand moment. The Ezra and the wolves was a really kind of impressive moment. Sabine doing so much impressive stuff with the jetpack and like shooting and flying, that was all like really I think well done, to keep the kind of atmosphere of like a lot's on the line here. I think that was well done. I think where it began to fall apart a little bit was I wasn't the biggest fan of what they did with Ezra getting captured and then the whole scene with the Emperor. I get that his family means a lot to him and that it's always going to be this huge thing for him, his family, and that he has this new family. I just felt like what he learned from Kanan in basically the last two episodes of like, this is why you can't change the future on very specific things because it changes what happens after that. Teasing him with this just after you've done it before, it kind of felt like, why didn't you just do that in the previous episode? Why wasn't Palpatine trying to manipulate Ezra by like luring him to that portal? Why did it have to wait until this episode to do it? And then just in general, like, just like, okay, we're switching to him being in his more like Palpatine kind of look rather than the Emperor look. And there was obviously some sort of a plan beyond it in that, like, was it just directly like Ezra would have been with his parents, or was it some sort of a trap to kill him in some way? I'm not entirely sure, but the result is that he acknowledges that like his friends at this point are more important, and he accepts the death of his parents, which again is something they've already addressed before. They tried to play on, I suppose, the heartstrings with this moment, but it didn't hit as hard as I think it could have for me. And so it did all lead up to, I suppose, him confronting Thrawn towards the end of the episodes. But I suppose before that, I actually really did like Ezra realizing that he had to go off on his own, that he couldn't join in with the rest of them and their kind of escape plan, that he had to go ahead with Thrawn's threat and just kind of surrender himself to Thrawn. That was cool because I liked the understanding moment between him and Sabine kind of acknowledging that this is something he has to do, so I will help you with this, even if it goes against like what Hera would want to do and so on. That was, I think, a very well kind of executed scene, as, you know, she just goes on to explain some things and she's looking constantly behind everyone and he's just gone, acknowledging that he, in a way, this is his Kanan moment. And they set that up, I think, more or less the entire episode, that he was going to have some sort of a big sacrifice moment, that he would learn from kind of Kanan in some way. So when they eventually got to it, it's a confusing scene, I suppose, in a way. It's a bit messy, I suppose, as a scene, because the hyperspace whales come in, and that's like Ezra's secret plan that he only told a few people about, and not everyone knew about. This was meant to turn the tides in their favor, and this is what was going to actually get the Empire out of the system. And in that way, I thought that was a very clever use of this kind of seemingly randomly introduced animal from before that Ezra had a connection to. And here this explains the signal thing from before that they set up, and an easy way to just get big, massive Star Destroyers out of the system. with obviously the rebels not having the firepower to just directly take out a blockade like that, but a whole fleet of these hyperspace whales could do that. Um, what I didn't necessarily like was kind of Ezra's final fight, last stand, of just like he didn't have his lightsaber with him, so he just had to use the Force a little bit. He didn't feel as powerful as maybe I felt he should have been. He was using the blaster. He gets shot by Thrawn, and then when it really came down to it, it's just the whales come through. They capture Thrawn, and I like the way that like he acknowledges that, look, I've trapped Thrawn here. This is the only way to get rid of everyone because I had to make this sacrifice. I'm not dying in this moment, but that he's kind of saying like I'm not going to be killed. The Force will be with me, but I'm going to be gone for a while. And he just kind of gives his final words to everyone, including, I suppose, the mystery to Sabine of just like, have you got my back, and what exactly that means. And then he activates the whales and they go off into hyperspace. I suppose the death tease is because like the windows were like cracked open, and we know hyperspace is, you know, ripping space apart to a degree, so it is dangerous to kind of do it like that, which leads you to believe that Thrawn is probably dead because he was right there in front of the window, which was cracked open, and they're going to hyperspace. The hope will be that the whale holding onto him protects him in the same way that Ezra's potentially protected, but we don't really know what's going to happen. So it was, I think, left open enough and just kind of unsatisfying enough that I had some issues with it, even though it was like, okay, that's their getting Ezra out of the picture for now moment, and it gave the rebels a chance, like, the Empire's gone, we can kind of finish the fight here, and that's more or less what they do. They liberate Lothal, cheers all around, and then they cut to the, obviously, kind of aftermath scene with an older Sabine, with a new hairstyle, still on Lothal, and then just acknowledging that we got this big victory, we're waiting for a, you know, reprisal basically from the Empire, for the Empire to come back and, you know, bring their full force to bear on Lothal, but they never do. Kind of, in a way, the Empire acknowledging a defeat by not returning to something like this. It's interesting. It's satisfying in a way that, like, they accomplished their goal of saving Lothal. I think a lot of this finale, in a way, just, it depends on if you care about Lothal as much as the characters do, and is it a memorable enough location where like an entire series was basically based around this planet. And for me, it's kind of a case of like, not quite. It makes the series feel somewhat small in scale because it was only ever really in the end about Ezra's home planet, Lothal. And while they did a lot with it, with the Jedi Temple and the different attacks and Empire taking over in different kind of ways and so on, it still was just this one planet that was really only introduced in this episode. And how much can I care about it when that's all it is, and you're not really trying to incorporate the rest of the rebels into things as much. And that's why I say, like, I feel the kind of time skip thing sort of really, in a way, saved the ending of the show. Of like, there was really no way to just have this be a complete end. So they had to, through the end of Rebels, set up some stuff. But it's also going to create some kind of controversial moments in that, doesn't this directly contradict like Yoda in like Return of the Jedi, of like, you know, when gone am I, like, last of the Jedi will you be? And it's like, well, no, technically you're saying Ezra is still alive, and this is post all of that, so Luke is meant to be the last Jedi, but he's not. And then, especially with the fact that we've just had episode 8, The Last Jedi, and you're almost getting to the point where you're like, Ezra could survive into Last Jedi kind of time period. Ahsoka could almost survive into that time period, and it's just like, how many of these characters are you kind of trying to suggest actually survived into this place? The whole Ahsoka and Sabine going after Ezra thing, I like it, I don't know if it's a direct setup for like whatever the next series is going to be, because for me, it almost feels a bit too plot focused, in that if you're going to have it be their series, you have to have that be such a heavy plot focused series, and you can't really do it in any way of the style of Rebels, where it's very slow paced, there's not a lot of plot. I don't think you can even do it in the style of the Clone Wars. It would have to be such a kind of narrative driven kind of story, which is why I'm almost kind of like, are they just going to do like a book or a comic series to kind of cover what happens next? Or will they find some way to make a series where they can include this as one of its plot points? That's where I'm kind of not particularly sure, which is why I was so shocked that they just went ahead and kind of just said, oh yeah, the Rebels win after all of this stuff, this leads to this, this leads to this, we win on Endor, the Emperor's defeated, and I'm still here, Hera's here, she has her son now, who's also kind of training to be a pilot, Jacen Syndulla, which was pretty cool. But I think again prompts questions of just like, you were so slow and waited until the very last minute to commit to that relationship. When did that happen? Again, I'm not going to question it too much or like criticize it too much. Like, it was pretty clear that the two cared about each other for a very long time. It was just the show revealing it to us like maybe a little later than we expected. So I thought that was definitely cool enough, and gives an option where like, if you are going to set a series like post episode 6, which I feel is probably what they will do. It'll be a post episode 6 kind of animated series coming up that will probably feature like a lot of different characters. I could see them doing some sort of like an anthology thing where like, okay, here's the Sabine Ahsoka plot point, here's Luke doing some stuff, here's Hera doing some stuff with her son, and all this kind of little bits and pieces in between. Leia, of course, like there's options if that's the way you want to go about things, because after I think the episode 7 and 8, we really want that gap between 6 and 7 filled in, and now that you've basically said that so many characters survived this, teasing Ezra's still alive, you can always use Thrawn as a villain at this point in time and use his book set up with the Chiss and so on. There's options to go with a series set at that time period. You, I think, more or less resolved like Callus's arc. I like that he was trying to convince Price to kind of turn to the Rebels right up until the end, because he realized it was such a freeing thing that he's not lying to himself anymore by being with the Rebels. And he has that moment at the end where they just kind of resolve his arc of like, you didn't lead to basically the massacre of Zeb's people. They're still survived. They have a new planet now, and they're willing to welcome you there, and just acknowledging the friendship of Callus and Zeb, and it's just this kind of fun friendship moment at the end for the two of them, as a sort of wrap up to Zeb's arc in a way. What else? I actually did like that they used Sabine as the narrator in the end, because they definitely in these last couple of episodes, and I think also some of the earlier episodes in this season with the Mandalore stuff, and then the lightsaber stuff from I think last season, with Sabine, established how I suppose close Ezra and Sabine were without being romantic, and just that Sabine is someone that Ezra could trust even more so than anyone else, because she was more closer to his age. And I like that at the end, like, this is something that Sabine is like remembering, and that she wants to find Ezra because he has such meaning to her. They still could go for the romance somewhere down the line, but for now it's just this kind of thing of like, this is what she considers to be her goal going forward. Throughout this season, they passed the torch of, I suppose, leadership of Mandalore away from Sabine, and now they've given her an actual path going forward, which I think is a really cool thing to do. I think she is the right character from the group to kind of deal with, in that you obviously set up Ahsoka in the World Between Worlds episode as like, this is why she would want to go after Ezra. But here is Sabine, who's in a way like his best friend, also wanting to go after him. So I like that. I'd like some sort of an explanation for like the Last of the Jedi will you be type thing, in that Ezra remains a Jedi unless they have killed him off in some way and he's technically not a Jedi anymore. Because like Ahsoka, you have the reason of like she's technically not a Jedi because she doesn't associate herself as a Jedi anymore, even though she still will like ally herself with people who still feel that way. It's a weird one, but I suppose it's a retcon that you kind of have to be willing to accept. But it's hard because it was said by Yoda, and you'd think that like, especially how Lucasfilm and Disney and how kind of in a way so respectful they are of the original trilogy, and how they'd be so willing to, I suppose, just say that like, yeah, Yoda was kind of wrong about that. He wasn't exactly right when he said this because we're setting up all this other stuff. I suppose we'll bring this to an end before I start repeating myself. I liked the 3 episodes. I thought it was, I think, a solid enough finale to Rebels without being perfect. I think the reason I'm not overly satisfied is just because I think at a base level, Rebels as a series was never, I think, as big as maybe we expected it to be. It didn't have it doesn't have, I don't think, or will have the impact of Clone Wars. It was always about like, okay, there's these characters and we're sort of trying to set up the rebellion. And that's the plot, and then here are the characters. I felt like right up until the end, they hadn't done all that much with Zeb. I think by the end, Zeb they have, what he has is fine, but they don't have a lot for him. Hera as the main connection to the rebellion, I think, is one of the least developed members of the Ghost crew, even though I acknowledge why she is so kind of beloved. For me, the key characters to take away from this are Kanan, Ezra, and Sabine. To me, by the end of the series, they came across to me as the strongest. And that's where, like, it's this weird thing where the show wasn't exactly fully character-driven, but it wasn't exactly fully plot-driven because its plot was just this vague building up the rebellion over time. And it just felt like by the end, they had to just really quickly give some character resolutions and then really quickly skip, like, yeah, the rebels are winning. And so it just feels like a little sudden how they ended it, but at the same time, fitting, I think, for the level that this series was at, which was never going to be the most blow-away, best Star Wars show ever, but solid for the fact that this is a good Star Wars show, and this was a good end, but it wasn't great. Weird conflicted feelings on it, but that's where I'm pretty much going to end the review. I will have a separate video probably later on in the week, maybe towards the weekend, where I reflect on the series as a whole rather than just focusing on the finale. But yeah, for now, that's been my thoughts on the finale for Star Wars Rebels. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the 3 episodes, how the series came to an end, did you like it or not? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.